Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Prather, and I'm GISinc's Marketing Cultivator. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar called ArcGIS Utility Network, Deep Dive into the Water Network. Today, we'll do a deep dive into the water network's capabilities found in the new ArcGIS Utility Network Management Solution provided by Esri. Our water network experts will cover topics such as what you need to know from vision to licensing and access, what benefits you will receive from mobility to the future of the utility network, and what you need to do, readiness assessment activities, education, and outreach. We encourage you to post questions throughout the webinar and respond to our quick 4-question survey at the conclusion of this webinar. We will send both a copy of this recorded webinar and the Q&As that we are unable to answer within a week of this broadcast. Now, as a quick introduction, GISinc has been serving the Esri community as a platinum partner for over 29 years. As a premier GIS services firm, we offer thought leadership, training, and services for all things Esri. And we have received Esri's ArcGIS Utility Network Management Specialty designation as a direct result of our experience with the utility network implementations in the water industry. We're also proudly a Platinum CityWorks partner and partners with SSP Innovations, creator of the tool GISinc that we'll mention later in this broadcast. Now, without further delay, I'm excited to welcome our presenters. Michael Parma, Solutions Architect of our water team, Emerson Chu, Solution Engineer of our water team, and Steve Mulberry, Senior Sales Engineer. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. Get ready to take a deeper dive into the utility network management solution for the water network. All right, Steve, let's boil this solution down for our guests.
All right, thank you, Shannon, so much. Excited to be here. We got a lot of good content to cover, hopefully. And first off, thank you so much for joining us. And I wanted to start off by kind of setting the stage here. You know, why listen to us? Why listen to GISinc? Why listen to Michael, Emerson, and myself? And I think it's important to kind of bring out three points here. Shannon mentioned that we're a platinum business partner with Esri. So what does this really mean? We've been in business for 29 years. So that's a 29-year alignment that we've had specifically with Esri and the ArcGIS platform, where we helped our customers build upon that platform, enhance, configure, and just really leverage the investment that they have in that platform. We've been a partner ever since Esri started the partner program, and we take a lot of pride in this because it's not just paying a partner fee, right? It's Esri requires us to be aware and very familiar intimately with the platform and how to implement it, how to deploy it, and how to help our customers gain the best out of that. And some of those regulations, as we call specialty designations, and one of the biggest ones that we like to stay abreast of is this release ready. And what that means is that we, as a company, we're keeping pace with the Esri technology. Esri has a major release and a minor release every year, introducing new technologies, improvements within the software, new services, new capabilities. And it's important for us to maintain that release ready specialty designation so that we can help, again, relay that to our customers and help them, again, get the best out of the technology. And now there's several of these specialty designations, and we hold almost all of them, but one that's particular for this discussion today is the Utility Network Management Specialty designation. And this gives us the ability to, again, stay abreast of the technology as releases it. And Michael Parma has been heading up our water team since the beginning of the UN process. This has been in place for a number of years, right? Esri just didn't do this overnight. They've been working this technology for several years now, and Michael has been heading up our team, working directly with the water team at Esri to make sure that our skills and our experience stay in line and in step with what Esri is doing within this space, so that we can then help our customers deploy and deliver successful implementations of the utility network sulution. And so with that in mind, I want to take a step back here, because not only do we help our customers fully leverage the platform, but we use it internally too as a company. One of those solutions is the hub. Esri has done a wonderful job with this COVID-19 pandemic, releasing lots of different solutions and templates, services and models and things like that to help folks really monitor and track and have this business continuity outlook with during this event here. And so we've implemented the hub too. So if you go to hub.gisinc.com, you'll see several links to webinars, recordings, and links to Esri's site and other powerful data sets and dashboards and things like that that'll help kind of steer you down the right path if you're looking for that kind of information and solutions and templates. And we know that everybody's been affected by this. There hasn't been not one person that's not affected by this pandemic. And we'd like to take just a moment here and kind of get a pulse from you guys listening to us today. How have you been affected by this pandemic? So what I'm going to do is kind of turn it over to Shannon to ask our first polling question.
Thanks, Steve. Yep, you should all see the polling question on your screen, and we're going to give you guys just a few seconds to answer that. When will the effects of COVID-19 pandemic impact your budget? If you think it's this year, 2020, maybe into next year. This is all that apply. So if you think it's going to affect both this year and next year, select both 2020 and 2021. If you see no foreseeable impact, select that. And then if you're unsure, maybe your role doesn't really get regular updates on budget, or you're just not been updated recently, click unsure. A few more seconds there. All right, we're going to close the poll. Thank you so much to all that participated. And we'll share those results. Looks like a good half of you will see impact this year and next year.
Which is what we're kind of seeing across the board, right? We have our management meets regularly, and they look at the different impacts, across the nation here in different industries, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So thank you so much for that, taking part of that. So let's get into the heart of this. Let's go through the topic. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start off talking about what you need to know from a visioning perspective, all the way to licensing and accessing. What is it going to take to kind of get you up and running. Then Michael Parma is going to walk us through the benefits that you receive by implementing the utility network, from field mobility all the way to the future of utility networks. And then Emerson Chu, he's going to talk to us about what you need to do to get started. And I think this is going to be probably the meat where I think you'll get a lot of benefit from, because we've gone through this process several times with clients. We've completed it. We're in the process of working through this strategy now with several clients, and so we've gone through this already. We understand the nuances and the things to look out for. So Emerson will take us through from readiness assessment all the way down to education and outreach. So let's get started. What you need to know. So first off, the vision, right? Esri's, this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, this has been in the works for a number of years. A lot of thought, a lot of process, a lot of trial and error has gone into this evolution of creating this utility network. And so Esri's sort of vision was to provide ability to model and edit and analyze complex networks using all of the ArcGIS platform, desktop, mobile, web, in the field, in the office, right? To have that flexibility, which we just didn't have that continuity back with the geometric network and some of the tools that would access that. The vision here is to support true representations. Again, something that we really didn't have with the geometric network. You got real clustered and confusing when you start having to map every asset and device and connection and things like that. So having that true representation without the clutter in the ground was a big goal here, as well as providing this, network management solutions for now and into the future, right? This is going to be how it helps support the utility pipeline and telecommunications world now into the future. I got 15 plus years there. Who knows how long this is going to take us into the future. But Esri's passion is to make sure that we have the ability to model, edit, analyze across all the Esri platform tools and solutions, support that representation, and then and keep us going into the future there. So if you ever, look at any technical blog or articles or webinars that focus on the infrastructure across the country, you'll probably hear this kind of cliche-ish statement here where 21st century problems require 21st century solutions. And that's another sort of vision behind the utility network, is to have that accessibility, but also the flexibility to move between different systems, right? The telecommunication or the electrical or the water or the sewer or the storm, and having the same sort of user experience and user interfaces to work with those different disciplines, as well as better ways to represent the information. And Parma's going to talk a lot about containment and associations, which is the new paradigm here for aggregating my information together and being able to map it and analyze it and share that information out, as well as looking at this information not only in 2D but 3D. Right? We're now getting very familiar with, especially inside of ArcGIS Pro, where I can switch between 2D and 3D on the fly and have schematics in my map and have all these different visualizations right at my fingertips. And that's how we're going to be able to solve some of these problems, is using some of this technology, this newer technology, to work through these problems that we're seeing. Now, when you look at the utility network from a glance, it's going to look very similar to what we're used to in the geodatabase schema, right? It's going to have the same data sets and feature classes and rules and domains and subtypes, but because it's new, there's going to be this new utility network object. There's going to be the ability to package up assets, in different flavors, like a water package or a sewer package or a storm package, right? And then provide that to different types of users throughout the system. So what does it take to get started? I'm going to kind of show you from a high level here. There's sort of two flavors here. There's this enterprise approach where you take utility network foundation and you implement it at the enterprise level, which requires ArcGIS Enterprise, it requires Desktop Pro, and the utility network management licensing. But this is meant to be, deployed in the enterprise. It's meant to have the high customizable aspect to it, have versioning, so have multiple people editing and working with the information, supporting that mid to sort of large utility. And we're going to focus on this throughout the presentation, but I also wanted to introduce you to this sort of simplified hosted services for those that are just wanting to get your feet wet, or just want to try this out, or you're a very small organization. This might be a place to start. This is based on ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Desktop Pro. It's a very fast startup. It just takes a few minutes to deploy. The features inside of ArcGIS Online, but I have the ability to use ArcGIS Pro to do that high precision editing and maintain that topology aspect to it. And what I want to do is kind of show you an example of that real quick. And we've got several live demonstrations that we want to show, so it's always fun to do live presentations here. So I'm going to bring my web browser over here. And what happens when you deploy this simple hosted deployment model with the Water Foundation is that ArcGIS Pro has the ability to deploy solutions, and there's I don't know if there's hundreds, but there's a ton of solutions that Esri provides that you can just deploy right from ArcGIS Pro to your enterprise or to ArcGIS Online, that come with a series of feature services like you see here, or web maps or web mapping applications. And so when you deploy the Water System Foundation, this is what you get as part of that deployment process. And one of those is a right out of the box web map capability that I can start to publish and edit information in here. So we can see I've got some features in here that that Emerson has already started to kind of work through and deploy and work with this system. We don't have to use all the features yet in there. Again, this is just a way for me to kind of jumpstart my understanding of the new utility network capabilities. Start putting data in there, and when I'm ready, I can just translate this directly over to the enterprise space and be ready to run in that arena there. And we at GISinc provide several jump starts, so we can help you get started in the enterprise space, as well as jump starting this in a simple hosted feature arena here. So if you want to get just started, just kind of get your feet wet, kind of understand the capabilities, this might be the path for you here. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into the enterprise world. So what, again, specifically do you need to get started? ArcGIS Pro 2.4 or higher, standard or advanced with the UN add-in tools. ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7.1 or higher, a standard or advanced. A couple nuances here to kind of keep in mind. The server must be federated with Portal for ArcGIS. The utility network license has to be deployed. And prior to 10.8, there was a UN extension that needed to be deployed as well. But what's neat about the new release 10.8 is Esri's made it so much easier for us to manage access and control access to the information that's being published by the utility network services through a new user type extension. And I'm going to talk about that here in a second. And then finally, all you really need is the enterprise database. So one thing I want to point out here is that these systems have been around for a long time, right? Pro's been around for over 5 years, enterprise longer than that, probably a decade, enterprise even longer than that, and the actual water distribution utility network foundation is on version 3.4. So this is it's a very stable environment. Right? It's been around for a long time, and we've deployed this for several customers, and we're in the process of doing it for a couple more right now. So we really feel this is a good time for you that are kind of on the edge, kind of thinking about this, to take the jump. You know, maybe start off with the simple hosted arena, right? To get familiar with it, and then move it over to the enterprise space. So what is this new thing? User type extensions that's new at 10.8. So user type extensions. So what this does, it allows Esri to kind of extend what users can do by providing access to specific functionality that can only be accessible through compatible application. And the key here is at the REST endpoint. So starting at 10.8, in order to access certain capabilities within the utility network service, you implement this user type extension. So what does this mean? So when you deploy the UN, you get basically 5 services deployed, and those highlighted here in orange are the ones that are locked down by that or enforced by that user type extension. Okay, so everybody else can see and query the other features, but those who need to actually work and analyze and edit and do those kinds of things would have a user type extension that would give them access to these 2 services, again, at the REST endpoint. So what does this look like across the board? So we might be pretty familiar with user types, right? Viewers, editor, all the way up to GIS professional. Esri introduced insight users last year, and now at 10.8, this new storyteller user type. But across the board, it doesn't matter how you implement the users, everybody can view and query the utility network services. Okay, so if I need to see it, identify it, pan, zoom around, you know, query and view it, everybody has that capability. But if I need to extend that further and do other things like tracing and displaying the stored network diagrams and things like that, that's where that user type extension comes into play. So I think it makes it so much easier now that as I deploy my user types, I can also add in or add on the capability to access those additional features that the utility network provides through this user type extension model here. So look for that at 10.8. If you deploy 10.8, that'll be part of that process here. So I've kind of walked through the quick vision about utility network, talking about the things that you need to get started with from a licensing perspective and hardware. Let's kind of switch gears here now and let Michael start talking to us about the benefits that you receive by implementing the utility network.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. For years, we've all wanted to be able to access full network functionality from wherever we are located. We don't want to be tied to our desk or having to lug around our laptop. With the utility network, that day has arrived. The foundational framework is in place, available to you, and continues to see rapid deployment, building from the foundation outwards towards the solutions. Now you have a lot more flexibility. Basically, it's service-based, so if you have access to an internet connection, you can access your UN. This really came to light for us a few weeks ago with the rapid transition across the country to work from home scenarios. One of our clients, a small utility, had limited VPN bandwidth, which was quickly saturated with nearly the entire staff now working from home. Still becoming familiar with the UN, the GIS manager called us up asking for help to ensure that he was able to access or work from home, and he happened to mention the VPN. After some brief discussion, he downloaded and installed ArcGIS Pro on his personal laptop, opened up a project, logged into his secured services, and he was up and running with little impact to performance and had no additional impact to his company's VPN. That's pretty cool. Now, I mentioned that you need an internet connection, but don't worry, Esri's working on disconnected workflows. So the native applications for iOS and Android, here we're talking about Collector, Workforce, Navigator, and the like. Collector currently has support for consuming the UN as a reference. This is useful for workflows where you're collecting features, not participating in the network. The issue is with branch versioning, not with the UN per se. Collector, of course, is a big part of many organizations, and Esri is actively working towards full support of the UN. What will this mean? You'll soon be able to edit your network, collecting features and manipulating connectivity directly from your mobile device. It'll assign feature IDs. Most of you probably have workflows where you collect features in the field and then assign feature IDs and attach the features to your geometric network when you get back into the office, often by script. You'll be able to have full editing capability on your mobile device. The web applications have been a big draw with the geometric network for years. I'd say these browser-based applications provide the widest availability of your network information to your users, either staff or public. Web applications with the UN bring your expected functionality navigation, with map navigation, queries, and the like. Traces are available and even more powerful as they can be configured for a broader audience. More on that a little later. And access to dynamic schematic diagrams is on its way. Sometimes seeing the connectivity is more important than the spatial arrangement. Oh, and editing, of course. All this through your web browser. Now with the UN, my thoughts on field mobility are starting to change. Most of us have probably historically thought of field mobility as out in the streets, outdoors, outside the fence. We hear that all the time, outside the fence. Our plants were simply a point on the map, a black box inside the fence. With the new capabilities of the UN and developments in indoor positioning, I'd expect to start seeing more mobility inside the plants and yards. 3D and indoors implemented together are going to drive this. Tied in with your work orders, operations, SCADA, navigation, this is going to be powerful. Next, we'll talk about the cross-platform integration. We talked about field mobility. How is this possible? Cross-platform integration will bring a nearly seamless transition between devices. We can all attest to an increasingly spatially aware workforce and general public. We all carry maps around on our smartphones and have constant access to information. The UN is a foundational technology to deliver the any device, anywhere, anytime experience to our staff. In the past, full network functionality was supported on only one platform, the desktop. We've all had a number of workflows where we've had to collect data or even write notes while out in the field and then go back into the office to make those corrections on our network data. Now we'll have the ability to make attribute, geometry, and connectivity editing regardless of the device. How many of you have seen inconsistent trace results in your geometric network when comparing those results delivered from the web application and the desktop? This is a result of two different code bases. You may have already noticed that ArcGIS Pro is now built around geoprocessing tools. This approach allows those same tools to be exposed to other platforms, not just the desktop, meaning consistent behavior and results across the platform, mobile, web, or desktop. Steve, can you and Emerson show us some of that mobility and cross-platform support?
Perfect. Yes, Michael. Okay, so I'm going to bring up here ArcGIS Pro. And Emerson, why don't you walk us through doing an isolation trace?
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. This is one of the big new features with the utility network, and one we get the most requests about is the tracing functionality with the utility network. So in Pro, I've got a new ribbon added to my set of tools. This is the utility network toolbar. And if I click on the data, I can see all of my utility network options. One that pops out to me to begin with are the tools that I have at my disposal for performing traces. These are a lot of the out-of-the-box traces provided with the utility network. We're going to focus today on the isolation trace. If I look in the center of my map, I have a green point placed. We're going to call this a potential leak or an area that needs attention in the system. So we want to try to isolate this particular area. So on the right side of my screen, I've got my geoprocessing trace tool pulled up. I've got my utility network and a few other options filled in. We're going to be forming an isolation trace against our system. And if we're going to check one option, we're going to check the option to include isolated features. So what we're going to do when we run this isolation trace, we're going to get our 2 valves that we need to close to isolate the area, as well as all features that are contained within that isolation area. And if we expand the functions tab, this is some new functionality with the UN as well. This is not an overly complicated example, but we're going to get a sum or a roll-up of our pipe length that will be affected when we run this isolation trace. So if we want to go ahead and run that, Steve, what we're doing is we're starting at our leak, traversing out, and trying to find valves that will actually need to be closed to perform this trace. It looks like it failed. I don't know if we have a video ready or we can try to run it again. Welcome to the world of the utility network. It's probably error 9999. If you receive one of those, you probably got your wings in the utility network. Steve, I don't know if we want to pivot to the video we've got, or we can come back to it later.
Yeah,
But what this
what
would
we do.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll bring that back over here in a second. But let's move into the web side of this and see if the tracing works over here as well.
Yep, absolutely. So in the demonstration earlier in Pro, the isolation trace would have run and produced all of our features that were isolated in between these system valves. As Mike Parma alluded to earlier, this is a geoprocessing tool. I took the results of this tool, imported it into Web App Builder Developer and the UN Trace Tool widget provided by Esri. With this, I can pre-configure an isolation trace. And Steve, if you want to go ahead and drop a flag, what we're going to do is set a flag and then run our trace. And this should go grab our 2 system valves that need to be closed and all that data contained within. So again, this is available with ArcMap and the geometric network, but there are nightly scripts and processes that have to be run to make this happen. With this, is you just export the geoprocessing tool, bring it in as a web app builder widget, and you're ready to go. So again, with these examples, we can demonstrate the functionality of the tracing tool in Pro as well as a mobile environment.
So because that blew up, I hate when things blow up, Emerson. I'm gonna show maybe an example of doing this from a smartphone. So let me bring this over. This is my smartphone here, and I'm connected to that exact same web app builder application. And I can pan around and zoom and do pinch in and pinch out using a smartphone activity here. But you can see I can also activate that same trace utility tool where I can put my flag down there on the map and run this this geoprocessing script there. So it's going to do the exact same thing that we did on the mobile side, and that should have happened on the desktop side, because we're hitting the same geoprocessing service. We're hitting the same underlying data. We're sharing that service-oriented architecture platform across all devices, which what Palmer was alluding to, having access to any system on any device anywhere, and that's really going to be the power of this service-oriented architecture there. So with that, let's jump back to the presentation here.
All right, Steve, thanks. So why the utility network? After all, the geometric network has been serving me well for years. I heard Esri ask in a seminar, do you have any technology in your pockets or your house which is 20 years old? When we think about it, we're hard pressed to come up with anything. Esri likes to point out that the geometric network is just that, and the UN is designed as a step in a new direction and a new technology. The UN is intended as a modernization of network management, keeping in step with broader information technology best practices. One of the biggest changes you'll hear about is the services-oriented architecture. This is important. Placing a layer of abstraction between the database and the user offers much greater flexibility. The UN is completely services based. Once published, there is no traditional client-server interaction, meaning users don't directly access the database, even for editing. This gives us a lot more flexibility in the architecture. Want to swap out your database for Oracle, SQL, Postgres? No problem. Because of the services, your users and applications won't know the difference. Here's another one. Your desktop editors no longer have to be on the same architecture backbone. This was pretty much a given with traditional database access. While we were implementing the UN for one client, their local hardware, actually a VDI, lacked sufficient graphics cards to run Pro. We were able to have him use his local desktop to run ArcGIS Pro through Amazon AppStream, accessing the hosted UN on our GISinc servers. 3 different environments tied together through services, and it was highly performant. Now, you might be thinking services-oriented architecture is something new and different. Not at all. It's already been a practice for years. The UN uses the standard REST API you've already been using. A regular REST or feature service is used for publishing, editing, etc. And we're all familiar with interacting with our data using these feature services, so I don't need to expand. However, there are several new specialized services. There's a utility network service for validation, subnetworks, tracing. There's a network diagram service that Steve showed earlier that handles all things diagramming. Think the schematic views here. There's a new version management service which handles the branch versioning and allows you to create versions, reconcile, and post through a service. Remember, cross-platform integrations here. And finally, there's a new validation service used for attribute validation and batch calculations. The UN is serving as the pattern for future service-based dataset development. You'll hear us talk about branch versioning in the context of the UN, but it's not limited to the UN. As a modernization effort in keeping with IT industry best practices, I'm going to bet that many, maybe even most of these technologies which we're becoming familiar with through the UN, we'll start to see implemented across our broader GIS platform. Okay, so ArcGIS Pro. By a show of hands, okay, no, not really. How many of you still consider Pro to be new? It's been out for 5 years. It's the standard. When we speak of desktop, you need to be thinking Pro first. For those of us on this webinar, ArcMap should be considered a supplementary tool necessary to manage our geometric networks. We should use ArcMap when we can't use ArcPro, or when we can't use Pro. As a 64-bit application, it has better performance with access to more memory. The ribbon interface is more intuitive with contextual menus more in line with our office productivity tools. The application's been organized around those geoprocessing tools, important in the back end for that cross-platform support. Pro is also built to support 3D. Again, ArcMap should be considered supplementary and used for the geometric network. There are tools to migrate your current maps from ArcMap into Pro, so the transition should be pretty smooth. Now, Pro does require an elevated graphics card. Hopefully, with normal IT upgrade cycles, your machines now support it. If not, use something like the Amazon AppStream to provide a quick alternative to purchasing new hardware. With all this talk about the services-oriented architecture, it should be no surprise that the UN is built upon ArcGIS Enterprise and Portal. Offloading core processing functions to the server allows for better performance across many devices. At initial release, the UN had technical requirements which were above those for Enterprise. Now, a couple release versions in, the UN requirements match those of the deployed Enterprise version. There is also the ArcGIS Online Utility Network Foundation solution. Steve mentioned that earlier. While not a fully functioning UN, as far as the trace and subnetworks, etc., you can rapidly deploy the schema as simple features to your AGO. You can get a quick win and become acquainted with the schema. Also, last month, Esri released a file geodatabase support for the UN. Some of you have been waiting for this. We've had conversations with a number of you, particularly small agencies, and the time has finally arrived. While a fully functioning UN, it is single user only. You won't be able to publish map services or applications from it. However, for those agencies which want the advanced tracing, subnetwork, 3D, such capabilities, but have difficulty justifying a full enterprise deployment to support it, this may be your answer. Additionally, for those organizations just starting out your UN migration, the file geodatabase approach would allow for prototyping and staging for your migration. Steve, can you show us how some of all this works together?
Sure. What I wanted to do was kind of highlight what Michael was talking about with, where does ArcGIS Pro sit and how do we get connected to the utility network services? So Michael mentioned running ArcGIS Pro in AppStream. So this is an example of using AppStream. AppStream is a service provided by Amazon Web Services, and other cloud providers have similar capabilities. But here, this is actually ArcGIS Pro running inside of a web browser, and it's hitting services that are running within our private cloud within our data center down in Birmingham, Alabama. And as you see, I can use some of the tools up here. I can pan and zoom around. I can see the information. I can click on an asset and look at the attributes, and very responsive because of that service-oriented architecture there, where it's all REST-based endpoints, and I don't have to have a direct connection to the database and rely on that very thick packet of information coming down the line to my ArcGIS Pro. And as Michael mentioned, Pro could be sitting on desktop, or it could be sitting here in an AppStream. And as we get more and have more discussions around people wanting to migrate to the cloud, this becomes a viable option for that process there. All right, Michael, back to you.
Yeah, so you'll hear us talk about the high fidelity data model. What does this mean? Basically, it's a more detailed database schema with new network capabilities, especially around real world representations. There's a consolidation of the 12 to 15 feature classes that we're probably normally accustomed to into 5 feature classes, organized into asset groups and asset types, enabled by subtypes. So for example, the water devices asset group contains valves, fittings, and pumps. Each is subtyped with its own set of unique attributes. Just as with a geometric network, this approach can be expanded for your localized needs. The UN model also now includes subnetworks, which are local subsets of your network at various tiers. Attribute rules and expressions within the database help maintain high quality data. These take the place of the attribute assistant add-in that most of us are probably using. I'm expecting the more granular component level will improve our ability to support asset management systems, particularly as we start heading into the facilities. Another big difference from the geometric network is this concept of explicit connectivity, another piece of high fidelity. Feature connectivity is determined by rules explicitly set within your UN, down to the combination of asset type, material, and diameter. If I want to connect a 2-inch PVC lateral to an 8-inch PVC main, I have to have a rule explicitly allowing that. The geometric network will allow us to pretty much drop a point anywhere. There are no shortcuts with the UN. Next is asset directionality. Your devices actually impact behavior on the networks. There are things like, these are things like the PRVs, backflows, pumps. Again, in the GN, these are just points on the map. Now they actually determine behavior. And this is accomplished partially by the use of terminals. Terminals are an attribute of a device. In the UN, pumps, for instance, are configured with a low pressure intake and a high pressure output. This is totally new. You don't have this data in your GIS. You will have errors when you build your UN. This is expected and just part of the process for building the high fidelity data. Now, one of the coolest things about the UN is containment. These are structural containers, such as vaults or meter pits, that simplify visualization. You can get more detail as you zoom in on the map and not clutter your citywide map with all the meters and fittings. Now, this is not scale dependency. Features inside actually belong to a container, so you can traverse relationships. You can toggle visibility if you want to see a simple or a more detailed view. It's really cool. Moreover, you can create these assemblies, which are a pre-configured collection of devices inside the container. Again, think of a meter pit and all the devices that are contained within that small area. One click on the map for the container and all the devices are added as well. And finally, associations. These are virtual connections. No one wants to spend time digitizing every little fitting and 4-inch pipe segment in confined spaces. Associations allow us to specify connectivity between devices to allow proper tracing, but without the need for all that minutia. This is really cool stuff. Emerson, can you and Steve show us again some of the containment and associations?
All right,
Absolutely.
yes, definitely. But before I go there, Emerson, I was having heartburn about that trace within ArcGIS Pro. So I went and reran it, and I found out my problem. And I wanted to highlight for the folks that, that function that you set up there and what actually it did. So you look down here at the bottom of the results, it actually summed up the length of pipe that are going to be affected by that trace. And so I just want to make sure folks kind of saw that capability there.
Great.
Let me bring back over the app stream, because I think this is where we're going to kind of really highlight that containment and association stuff. So go ahead, Emerson.
Yeah, absolutely. Another big enhancement and thing that people have been looking for with the UN are is this concept of containers and associations. But on the flip side of that, containers and associations also make people a little bit nervous. Because I have this high fidelity, can I manage these increased assets? I've already got enough on my plate. How do I create them? How do I digitize them? Well, I want to use this demo to highlight two things. One, I can use the enhanced features in Pro to create group feature templates. These allow me to go ahead and quickly create containers. So if I look in my favorites, I've got a 3/4 inch residential tap with 4 meters. So this is my tap, residential service line, and then a meter pit with 4 meters contained within this meter pit. So I'm using a group feature template here to go quickly digitize a feature. I can add it to my map. And then when I create this, it's going to drop my meter pit as my container and then create all the subsequent features inside of it. So I have quickly there in one stroke created this container with multiple assets inside of it. And if we zoom in here, I can see I've got my meter pit with my flow valve, service connections, another valve in there. Again, on my utility network ribbon, I can turn those features off if I like. I can hide this content so I don't have to see it for cartographic purposes, but it is still there. It is still participating in the network. We can turn it off or turn it on. We can also view associations, right? This is logical connectivity between pieces of geometry. I'm not having to manage a small little piece of line work or physical piece of geometry. I have now associations to manage this for me. So again, wanted to highlight two things here. One, the creation of containers is not that complicated. And two, it's not complicated because we can use our group feature templates provided by ArcPro.
Thanks, Emerson. Perfect example there.
Well,
Back to
thanks,
you, Mike.
Emerson. Yeah. So remember, the UN is a new framework under active development. All of Esri's development efforts and new functionality are focused on the UN. The GN is now in maintenance mode. So the most fundamental thing about the UN is modernization of the architecture, which we've already discussed, and data quality. The data is key to everything. In the future, we're going to continue to see improved data quality. There are rules and processes built directly into the UN to prevent creating erroneous data. This is a built-in QA/QC proactive cleanup by preventing errors from getting into the data in the first place, not just detecting and cleaning them up after the fact. More advanced tracing is now supported and continues to be developed further. These are supported by rules in the UN itself, and so they're configurable. Rather than just the familiar connectivity and valve isolation tools from the GN, we'll be able to actively stop traces at predetermined types of assets, such as system valves. This will dramatically improve our ability to trace out subnetworks from pump stations and within our pressure zones. A key point here is that since these are in the utility network, in the database itself, these traces will provide consistent results and be available across all devices. We didn't really mention this earlier, but the UN has multidisciplinary support, which will be particularly useful for agencies managing multiple utilities such as water, gas, and electric, potentially with shared infrastructure. Of course, 3D is coming. Support is already here, though I think most people lack some of the data to fully leverage it. But imagine being able to see and follow your assets underground to see conflicts with other utilities and the arrangement within shared structural features such as ducts. We've been talking about it for years, how to handle vertical assets. As development of the UN continues, we'll see a move into the buildings. I expect, we'll progress from the field into the yard and then into the building. And this is where indoors will meet the UN. I imagine seeing a lot of improved workflows around the operation of plants as time goes on. A couple of last things I'd like to point out is that with the latest release of Enterprise 10.8 and Pro 2.5, we're seeing lots of performance improvements around validation, versioning, dirty area management. Steve mentioned the licensing and file geodatabase support. Looking at Esri's roadmap in the near and midterm, we're going to continue to just see a lot of performance improvements, configurable behavior for split features, display of partial edges during tracing results, more improvements around versioning and managing conflicts, SDK support for integrations, and I want to make sure that I mention again the disconnected networks. Now remember, the UN is a framework, not a solution. Your implementation will undoubtedly branch away from this foundation in various places. The utility network is here and will bring your utility network management in line with modern IT best practices. I'm really excited about the future of the UN for water utilities and hope you are too. Thanks for joining us this morning. And Shannon, I think you had a polling question.
I do. Let me launch that. All right, so where are you in your utility network implementation process? Maybe you haven't started, but you intend to. You're doing some data quality review, planning, already implementing, or perhaps does not apply. Give everyone a few seconds. All right, thank you to all who participated. We'll close the poll now and share those results. Looks like about half of you have not started but intend to, and we've got a sprinkling of all of the other categories, some data quality review, planning, implementation.
Excellent, thank you, Shannon. So Emerson, why don't you take us home now with the strategies that you've implemented to use the utility network.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. So we've talked about so far what you need to know, some of the benefits you'll receive. Now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what you need to do to actually make the UN a reality. I'll be breaking this process down and discussing each step in further detail. Before I do, however, I want to point out that this process is not set in stone. It's one we have developed and refined over time, and it has proven successful to us as an organization and our clients as a template when moving to the UN. The first step in the process is the readiness assessment. And I want to point out a few key concepts here. This is not something that just happens overnight. You don't roll over out of bed and say, hey, I want to migrate to the UN today. It takes careful, thoughtful planning and preparation. It also is important here, I think it's very important before we actually start the readiness assessment, is to develop a UN working group. If you don't already have a stakeholder group, this is a very important time now to put one together, because again, this is a long migration process. Is something that takes thoughtful planning and preparation, and you don't want to surprise people with this. You want to have people on board and invested in what you're trying to do. So we'll go ahead and jump now into what the readiness assessment is. I broke this out, I kind of exploded it a bit. It's a project on, into itself. And the first aspect of that is the initial planning meeting that we have. This is where we discuss logistics, importantly, whether we're going to conduct this on site or off. We have a proven track record with conducting these readiness assessments off-site, and we can do that given the nature of our environment today. We then move into an infrastructure review with you. This is all built out on the new enterprise framework. This UN model is the first one to take it end-to-end using enterprise. We want to make sure your infrastructure can support this new data model. We'll then move in and look at your staffing. And when I say staffing, we're looking to make sure you have the resources to not only support your editing and working in the GN, but helping to prepare for the migration to the utility network. Twofold, we're also talking about, do you have the resources to maintain the infrastructure and administer it? If it's IT doing it, do you have a good relationship with them to maintain that infrastructure? We're going to do a high-level review of your data while we're there with you. We're going to use the Esri data loading tools to do that. This is a great solution provided by Esri that helps us generate a source and target schema, and then look and see how your data will map over and what that level of effort will be. We're then going to look at your editing workflow. So do you currently do a lot of mobile field editing? Do you have a traditional versioning system in place, or do you edit to the default? So we're going to look at that and see what we need to do to prepare to move to a branch versioning. As Parma alluded to, Collector does not currently support branch versioning, so we need to start figuring out how we're going to work toward that and adjust your editing workflows to accommodate that. We're also going to look at your desktop competency. For some, this is a migration to the UN, but it's also the first time people will be fully embracing Pro, right? So we have to make sure that our users have a firm understanding of Pro, and if there's training needed in Pro, and we'll do that there. We'll assess and provide training pathways and whatever we need to fill any of those holes. We'll wrap it all up with an execution roadmap. This ties everything together, identifies any gaps, and what we need to do to move forward to have a successful UN migration. So the next step in the process is the data cleansing portion. We've all heard that same adage, garbage in, garbage out. That holds true with the UN as well. We're going to look at your source data. We're going to look at key attributes that are needed for the UN. We're going to use Data Reviewer and leverage some of the Esri water utility rules that they've already created, and add to those with some that we've created in-house to really get a firm understanding of what your data looks like, if there's any holes, and then more importantly, how we can start to work through those source errors. They don't have to be finished, but it really helps when we're working through the actual migration. We're also next going to look at platform implementation while we're working through this. And I want to point out, this does not have to be step 1, step 2, step 3. You can parallel some of these. So while you're doing your data cleansing, we can go ahead and start talking about platform implementation. So it's not set in stone that one has to occur after the other. So with that in mind, when we're looking at migration support, Steve mentioned this earlier, we're a business partner with SSP. They have a great package out called SSP Sync that will allow you to stay in the GN while syncing your data periodically over to the UN. This can be set up programmatically to run whenever you'd like. And this allows you to keep 1 foot in the GN, 1 foot in the UN, and prepare if you've got any long-term integrations that you may need to prepare for. It gives you that freedom to do that. The other is the Esri data loading tools, another great solution that allows you to use spreadsheets, map your source to your target, apply that to an asset package, and load it into the UN. We prefer a development environment just to keep development and production separate. You saw what happened in our demo. Errors can happen. You're going to get that dreaded 9999 error at some point. We just want to make sure that while we're working and getting some of these errors, we're not affecting production. The utility network is resource intensive. We want to spec out your servers to make sure they can handle the new utility network. Steve mentioned this earlier, enterprise is a minimum of 10.6.1. We prefer you to be at 10.7.1 just to take advantage of some of the new functionality. A side note, the latest sewer model requires 10.8. However, it can be modified to run on 10.7.1 with a slight workaround. It does also require Pro 2.5. New user types need to be considered here. We need to provision those for 10.8. And we need to plan for collector as well. It does not support branch versioning, but that is in the works. The next step is migration planning. This is probably the longest portion. This is where we're going to test, correct, get feedback. We're going back and forth to our UN working group. We're going to keep developing our crosswalks, right? Our mappings between source and target to make sure that we're accommodating any changes, keep leveraging that development environment. We're going to be looking at sharing. If you've never federated server with Portal, right, and you've got to manage sharing now through Portal, we're going to cover that and make sure we have data shared out to all of our editors and viewers alike. We're going to have people go ahead and start editing in development, get them used to versioning, let them go ahead and start playing in the environment. We're going to go ahead and work with our working group to start scheduling downtime. We're going to start planning for that cutover. And we're going to start addressing any training that we may need in Pro and go ahead and start being proactive about that. The next step is integration planning. This is where we're going to make sure all of our concerns are addressed. We've addressed everybody's issues. We're going to consult with the working group. We're going to test, right? Arc Pro is not necessarily an integration, but we want to make sure that branch versioning is working correctly, that we can edit the utility network. We're getting closer and closer to publishing our UN to production, right? Go ahead and connect into production, see if Pro works with this new UN. I'm going to start migrating our web applications over and planning for those. We also want to start looking at some of our bigger third-party integrations, asset management packages, and the like. And then finally, we'll move on to implementation. Testing phase is over. We've got through all the boring stuff. We're now ready to go ahead with the fun implementation. Hopefully we've planned. We're going to schedule our editing freeze. We're going to begin with our desktop pro users, make sure they can connect in and start editing. We're going to repoint all of our web maps and applications. This was already supposed to be done during the testing phase. We're just doing it again in production. This could be scripted out or it could be manual. And then finally, we're going to clean any errors that may still be in our utility network. We may not have been able to address all of them. There may still be some that we need to address on the UN side of things, and we'll start doing that. And finally, the last piece of this wheel is education and outreach. We're not done when this is implemented, right? Change is scary. So we want to make sure that everybody who's invested in this is educated and knows what's happening. It's a lot easier to promote your product if you've had everybody invested from the beginning. And that's again harkens back to that UN working group. And continue to provide further training. Leverage those Esri learning pathways. Ensure that all your users are getting the proper training that they need. So again, to wrap up, this is a process that we've used before. I'm running a little short on time, so compacted it a little bit. But with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Steve.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Emerson. And let's throw up our last polling question before we do a quick summary here. Go ahead, Shannon.
Yep, you all should see the polling question on your screen. Go ahead and select all that apply. Question is, what's keeping you from starting your migration to the utility network? So the unknown, cost, bandwidth, this pandemic, or perhaps it does not apply. So you can select all that apply. We appreciate your feedback. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Thank you for all that participated. And here are the results.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shannon. Let's do a quick wrap up here then. Remember, we kind of walked you through what you needed to know from visioning to licensing. We talked about the benefits you receive. Palmer did an excellent job walking through each one of those components. And then Emerson shared with you his strategy and our team strategy for when and how to implement the technology. One thing you might want to ask yourself, here's some questions that if you're thinking about going to the utility network management system, do I have ArcGIS Enterprise? Do I have standardized data model? Do I use Pro? Some of these questions, third-party applications, do you need help? And remember, we'd love for you to use us because we're a specialty designation, but if you use a business partner to help you with this migration, make sure they have that specialty designation for the utility network, especially the water side of it. With that, we again appreciate you so much for joining. Shannon, we'll turn it right back over to you to close us up.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and thanks to all our speakers. It's all we have time for, folks. We're going to respond to all the questions we didn't get to address today in a blog post that will be published next week and included in an email with a copy of this webinar recording. Quick reminder, there's going to be a brief 4-question survey that appears on your screen at the conclusion of this broadcast. And as always, we really appreciate your feedback in that survey. Thanks for joining us, guys, and have a great day.